Record. So I was just telling Scott I appreciate him being back, but formally I'll say it. Scott, I appreciate you taking the time to come back on the show. It's been over almost 2.5 years, I think. December 5th, 17 was the first time you were on the show. But I really appreciate you being back.
Wow, it doesn't seem like it was that long. I feel like I just talked to you yesterday.
I know, and I'll tell you what, I reference your book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. I'm going to say as much as any book that I reference, and a few things, and we'll talk a lot about that book, your books, this book, Loserthink, that I just covered on the show. But some of the things from that I say all the time: energy is the most important metric to track. I must think that every single day. I have two small kids, 6-year-old and 3-year-old. I think that all the time. The goal, the system, obviously, the process of systems, and then if you fall short of a goal, the people, the skills, the experiences you have along the way. Those three things, man, they smack me on a regular basis.
And the talent stack idea probably comes up a lot too. Once you hear the idea of stacking talents to become special, you can't unhear it. It just becomes part of your strategy.
It does. And I'll tell you what, I heard you on James Altucher's show recently. And actually, I bought your book, and then I bought Mike Rowe's book. I feel like you and him were on his show relatively close together. And I heard you talking about talent stack. And so one of my goals when I hear an interview and then have them on my show is to not recreate the same conversation. And it's kind of, I think you would probably agree with this, how you think about it, but it is, obviously the listeners, et cetera, but I've been interviewed a lot. And I'm sure I know you've been interviewed a lot. And sometimes it's just a given. You have to say the same things a lot. Right. But I want to make it as fresh for selfishly myself as I do for you. So.
Well, the only question you're not allowed to ask is, how do you come up with all those ideas for Dilbert? Just don't ask that.
I feel like I'm not even going to talk about Dilbert. I'm not going to talk about Dilbert at all. So don't, and actually I probably have read most of your.
I realize I have to talk about it. If anybody's seen this on video, I'm wearing this strange bandage-looking thing on my hand, but that's because I draw on a screen, and this helps my hand move across the screen better.
I was thinking that was a really, no offense intended here, lame brace for your hand, but I'm glad to hear.
Worst doctor ever.
I was trying to figure out, that's like early in professional fighting, even in amateur fighting, our resources are limited. So we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of actual people who know how to tape hands and or fix cuts, et cetera. So that's kind of what our hand wraps looked like in the early years of professional fighting. But before I actually kick off with Loserthink and kind of what brought me back to you, I feel like I'd like to bring this out there. It's pretty timely that I have you on the show because of this coronavirus and everything that's going on and doing what you do. I've seen you post about it, and I'm sure you're observing, which is what you do, sit and observe and objectively observe. Just let's start out with that and your thoughts on the virus, the reality,
Well, let me first say that unlike most of the other topics, I'm not an observer on this one. The Wuhan virus, I'm calling it the Wuhan virus because I heard the Chinese government really, really hates it when you call it that. So from now on, I'm going to call it the Wuhan virus. But this one's not a spectator sport. 100% of the citizens need to modify their behavior in order for everybody to get through this the best way we can. So I feel like I'm off the sidelines, and I'm actively thinking, all right, what is my special contribution? What can I do that someone else isn't going to do and is also useful? And everybody should be thinking in those terms. So if you've got a grandmother or a grandfather, see if you can help them, maybe do some shopping or something. In my case, I'm helping people think about it in the most productive way. That's sort of what I do. And helping people know what to do and what to worry about and what not to worry about. So that's the first thing. Nobody's an observer. And if you're still in the mindset that you're watching this as opposed to participating, you need to get on board because we need everybody.
Yeah. Just this morning, actually, my wife, so I'm going to a school to speak tomorrow, and it's kind of funny because my wife is a teacher, but she had said to me, hey, with you doing these presentations, be very aware of it. And I was like, wait a minute, you're a teacher, you're in the school every day. But yeah, and it's something for me. Actually, I'm going to talk about ego as you talk about ego in the book Loserthink, but it is something that, whether you get a flu shot or you don't get a flu shot, this is like, I said to her, look, I get it. This is different. I don't worry about germs, but this is at a level that there's no bravado. There's no nothing here. It's a very serious thing that I am. And as you said, kind of, we all should understand that we're a part of it, and we're part of it, not just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, and you're saving grandma's life. You are young and healthy, and you're unlikely to be have any real health risks from the virus. But if you get it, you can spread it. So everybody's in it.
Yeah. So what I'm going to allude to now, and I'll start out talking about it, is your book, Loserthink. And as soon as I heard you talking about this book, I thought, I want to get it. I've read How to Fail at Almost Everything, Still Win Big. I've read this. I probably will read Win Bigly next. But the subtitle of this is How Untrained Brains Are Ruining America. And do you know who Michael Haidt is?
The selfish gene is
Happiness Hypothesis.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay. So I've heard him on a bunch of shows, and he wrote a book called Coddling of the American Mind. And it kind of falls in line with this. And I don't know if the correct word is pathological thinking or incorrect thinking or non-objective thinking. But when I got on Amazon and I looked at it, what this book was and the kind of the fine print about it, the idea of these basically self-induced bubbles of reality that keep us trapped in our own bubbles of reality, or mental prisons, as you talk about in the book. But where did the impetus come from, maybe the origins of the beginning of, this is a book. This could be an idea that I could write about?
Well, I spend a lot of time on Twitter. And if you spend time on Twitter, you see good arguments for stuff and you see bad arguments for stuff. And one day I noticed a pattern. And so I started tracking it. And I thought, is there something about who it is that says the bad opinions, the ones that actually are just nonsensical? I'm not talking about a political preference. I'm talking about just thinking wrong. And I noticed a correlation, which is the people who had been trained to think did it well, and people who had not been trained to think didn't know that they couldn't do it well. So they did it as much, but not as well. And so I would click on profiles and say, okay, here's a really good opinion, even if I disagreed with it. Sometimes somebody will disagree with me online, and I'll think, I'm not sure I'm going to buy your opinion, but it's a credible, solid opinion. You click on the profile, and it will be scientist, economist, lawyer, engineer, places where they actually teach you how to compare things productively, and therefore think about them productively. And then I'd see just opinions that are crazy, just like crazy opinions. And I click on the profile, and it would be artist, musician, journalist, just very consistently. Now, if you were to measure the IQs of the people with the good opinions versus the bad, I don't know that they would be different. I mean, it could be the same. It's not about intelligence. It's clearly about being exposed to the techniques of thinking. Let me give you a concrete example. I've got a background in economics and an MBA from a good business school. And I've spent a lot of time in the corporate world in a variety of jobs. So I've just got to see a lot of stuff that you wouldn't see if you didn't spend time in those domains. And one of the things you learn as an economics student or practicing economist is how to compare things. And I'll give you just the perfect example. You see people today comparing the regular flu, killing, let's say, 50,000 people a year, just throw an approximate number in there. And then they compare it to the Wuhan flu, which is brand new. And they say, well, only X few hundreds died from this new thing, and the regular thing that we have every year is killing 50,000. So why are you so worried? And I look at that, my head explodes, because no economist would compare something at the beginning of what is almost certainly going to be an exponential growth to something that already did it. There's no sense to that at all. And it shouldn't make you feel comfortable that one number is smaller than the other, because the entire point of it is that small number is going to quadruple that big number, and it's going to happen so fast that your head will spin. That's the whole point. So watching people make the wrong comparison is driving me crazy. Here's another one. People were looking at the situation in Italy, which is pretty grave, no pun intended. But the hospitals are packed up and overrun with the Wuhan flu people. Now, people are saying, well, you can't compare the United States to Italy because they might have fewer ICU units, there's more smokers and all these things that are different. So they're using this as a way to feel good that experience won't come to America. But here again, it's a comparison error. You don't compare Italy to the United States to figure out what our risk is. I mean, you also do that, but the primary comparison is Italy today with this virus compared to Italy last year with a regular virus. Did the regular virus overrun the hospital to the point where they're literally deciding who lives and dies? It's triage. It's like a battlefield where they don't have enough resources for everybody. So somebody actually is just going to die for lack of resources. Has that ever happened in Italy before because of the regular flu? And the answer is no. So whatever is happening there is likely to be reproduced here unless we do extreme efforts, which we're doing a pretty good job of, by the way, of getting ahead of it. So those are the examples that you see, and you're seeing them today, and it's fresh, and it matters. Because if people say, hey, I'll compare this to a regular flu, and then I'll just carry on my life because, hey, regular flu is no big deal. Those people could be killing grandma, so it's actually life and death to get you thinking straight about what you're comparing to what. So that's where I think I can help.
And I think, and I thought about it, I do want to go back to the Twitter thing you were alluding to, but I want to highlight this and maybe have you extrapolate on it before we go back to that. But what you just did there with me was very non-emotional thinking. And you talk about it in the book, Loserthink. I follow Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, the guys who wrote Extreme Ownership, et cetera, and they talk about detachment. So what you just did there is a very objective, non-emotional way of explaining something, which is the opposite of probably 99.9% of people, or a large amount of people. And I would say that that's a skill. And I can tell you 1,000,000%, that's why I love your book so much. Honestly, probably in my marriage is where I see it the most, in my marriage and with my kids, because I get emotional about something. My ego gets involved. It's my romantic idea that you allude to with Dilbert, figuring it out, in this book. That is a learned skill for you. Now it's essentially your profession, thinking objectively and detaching your emotion from it. But how did that evolve in you? And then how did it kind of take its forefront in your life?
Well, you have to wonder how much is natural. I've often been accused of being a robot for not showing the required amount of emotion for things that other people are emotional about. But I reject that because I feel like my range of emotion is exactly like every other normal person. It's just I'm a little bit more choosy about where I focus that. So I've got to have a real good reason to get mad, but boy, can I get mad. So trust me, my level of anger is unmatched. but I call my shots.
I almost feel like that's like saying someone stand beside you and you're fuming. I promise you, sir, I am very, very mad right now. I am fuming inside. That's kind of how I'm thinking, but I'll take your word for it that you do get angry at certain things.
But by the way, if you want to, here's a hypnosis tip. If you ever want to scare the pants off of somebody who could beat you up, and in my world, I'm not like a big guy. So large, dangerous, men are dangerous to me as they would be to anybody smaller. But if you really want to scare somebody, don't say anything. Just look them directly in the eyes or say very little. Excuse me, sir, we'd like to end this now. And, or just whatever it is. And people do not like silence.
100%.
Because it introduces the unknown. It's like, why is this guy not afraid of me? Why is he being so calm? Does he have a gun in his pocket? Is there somebody behind me who's got a red dot on the back of my head? And of course, none of that's true. But if you act out of context, like unusually quiet in a place where you shouldn't be, people don't know what to do with it, and they have to come up with a new model, and it takes them out of their fight. So
and that's a similar line of thought. And I'm relatively new to business, but actually not in fighting, because fighting was negotiation. But I mean, that's very similar negotiation. Say what you got to say and then shut up. And then it creates them to be uncomfortable. And then they just say more than they should say, or blurt out something they didn't really mean to say. So, but it's hard, man. It's hard to just keep your mouth shut when you don't want to.
Yes, it is hard. It takes some practice. But to answer your question, so part of the reason I wrote Loserthink is that I have an unusual career path, and I've reached a certain point in my life where I've worked an extraordinarily wide range of jobs. So I've done marketing and strategy, I've done finance, engineering, I've done writing, art. So I can see the world through all of the filters that you learn with each of these professions. And I could see that I was just seeing through more windows than other people. So I could tell, the time value of money. I knew what a sunk cost was. I knew that it's got to be, a valid comparison only if you've got a good control case. So these are things which I took for granted as basic things that people pick up, but you're only going to pick up those things if you change channels. In other words, if you stay in your art channel, or let's say you're a gifted musician, smartest person in the world, gifted musician, but if you haven't looked at how an economist sees the world, it's a blind spot. It's not common sense, and your native intelligence can't fill in those dots. You just have to see how they do it. You can learn it very quickly, which is why I wrote the book, because in one paragraph you can pick up an entire skill. You just have to hear it for the first time and say, oh, well, as I did earlier when I compared Italy to Italy, probably a lot of people listening to this are going to say, that's the first time I thought of that. But it won't be the last time, because you only have to hear it once. And then the next time this situation comes up, you're like, oh, is that the right comparison? And then you're halfway there.
And I'll fill in something that I won't ask you. I'll just state to not ask the same question, but that is exactly what you did with Loserthink. Can you explain why you did that in the book? I believe you also explained it in Altucher, but that when you put words to something, it then takes a place in your mind. It's easier to remember. You can identify it. And I really liked how you said, I can then hold myself accountable. Am I operating in Loserthink right now? Like, oh, woe is me. I'm a victim. They should this, they should that. Oh, I should. It's like, no, man, that's Loserthink. Get out of there. Let's go back to the Twitter thing. So you mentioned just now how you had multiple, a variance of professions along the way and saw different perspectives with a different eye. You also alluded to the comments that you would get on Twitter. And the book is written, thinking like psychologist, thinking like a historian, thinking like an artist, thinking like engineer, leader. Those patterns, right? Did they come part from the trend you saw on Twitter? Like, artists think this way, scientists think this way, engineers think this way, and part from your experiences, or was it one or the other?
Well, your question is more insightful than you knew when you asked it. So the real answer has to do with publishing and writing and communication and how to make a book. So I had a whole bunch of unformed ideas, like how about this, how about that? And I knew there was enough material for a book, but in order to write a book that people will understand and talk about, and they know how to stick it to things they already know, you sometimes have to craft it in a bit artificial way. So I will admit to you that the categorization of this is how an engineer thinks, or this is how a scientist thinks, that was really for the purpose of building a book that was easy to consume and then easy to remember. But there's a lot of overlap. So in other words, an engineer probably thinks almost the same way as a scientist. Mm-hmm. If you take away the details of the knowledge, I'm talking about the thinking style, very similar, and others as well. But it was just useful because it reinforces the fact that this is not about being smart or dumb. This is about what you experienced in terms of thinking styles. So it helps reinforce that point. But the overlap in the, engineer thinks this way, psychologist thinks this way. It's not a clean overlap, or it's not a clean separation.
Yeah. And I definitely get that. One, with what I'm doing now, writing books, having a podcast, but also when I speak on stages, of which you have experience as well. I am me. It is the message every time. But the words I use to explain that to the people, or the selling of the book, or the packaging of the book, the presentation, that, I don't know, it evolves in time, or it's a different word here, a different word there. But I definitely get that. So, and I never read a book and then have a conversation and base the conversation off of all of the elements of the book. It's kind of like intertwined conversation in that. But there were a few things that I wrote down from the chapters in the book that I did want to bring out and just see where they lead us. But one of my favorite was ego as a tool. And as a professional fighter, I mean, I believe, you know, when I was fighting, I believed I'm the best. I believed that I could beat whomever I was going to fight. And I trained that way and I live that way. And that's the way it is. And you know, in the dichotomy of leadership, they talk about, you know, ego and humility. But you talk about ego as being a tool where you got to ramp it up and ramp it down. And I absolutely, again, that's a mental structure that I now use in my brain, right? When do I need to be that guy? And when do I need to not be that guy? So go ahead.
Yeah, the key to that concept is to remember that you are not your ego. It's easy to imagine that the thoughts you have about protecting yourself and how important you are, or how valuable you are, is somehow wrapped up with who you are. It's like I am me. My ego and me are the same person. It's more productive to think of your ego as a tool or even an enemy, uh, depending on the context. The enemy is if your ego is preventing you from doing something useful. So if your ego says, you know, I don't want to go to that party because I've got I don't know, pimple on my forehead or something. So your ego is stopping you from going to the party. But if you went to the party, nobody would care about your pimple. You'd have a good time. You'd meet somebody new. You'd meet your future spouse or something. So your ego more often prevents you from doing things you know would be good for you than it does protect you. So think of it more as an obstacle or an enemy, or the most productive way, as you mentioned, is to think of it as a tool. So that's the way I try to frame it. So I say to myself, okay, in this situation, isn't my best play to remove my ego and imagine I know nothing and I'm just learning from somebody who has something to tell me. I'm not arguing with them, I'm just learning. So that's a case where you take your ego, you remove it, you take it off the table. Likewise, if you're, let's say, doing a new business or learning to speak on stage for the first time, here I'll speak to your experience when you first became a public speaker, and you're thinking back to the first few times you were considering going up on that stage in front of the crowd, one of the scariest things in the world. Your ego is absolutely your enemy in those situations. As soon as you can imagine that you don't have any risk, then you don't. Because the audience is pretty kind, and people don't get on stage until they're at least, you know, capable, qualified. You know, it just doesn't happen. Nobody gets on stage and then figures it out. You know, everybody's ready, and audiences are almost universally kind. You know, they won't notice your little errors. They don't care. So if you can get your ego completely out of it, suddenly you could be a public speaker. Now, what would happen to your life if you were comfortable talking to a crowd? Well, you're the first person they think of at your company for a promotion, because talking to the crowd is a pretty big part of being a leader. And, you know, and so on. It leads to every kind of opportunity, exposure, connection, networking, et cetera. So there's this whole world of stuff that opens up if you can kill your ego on command and take the risk. Now, of course, the whole point is that sometimes you go up on that stage and it doesn't go well. And I've had that experience where I was just told by a billionaire once told me I did a bad job at a speech that he was paying me for. And I absolutely, I hated the experience of it, but he was also completely right. Meaning I was giving a new topic that was the first time, and, you know, they talked me into giving it. I wasn't ready. I knew I wasn't ready, but it was sort of a favor, and I did it anyway, and it wasn't good. And he told me it wasn't good. And I got to say, it burned. It stung. But he was also completely right. And I can put it in context and I can move on. And I fixed my presentation after that, and it went well every day after that. So kill your ego, use it as a tool. And then the second part is, sometimes, let's say you're going into a fight or you're going into a job interview, some high pressure place. It's actually pretty good to tell yourself that you're good at this.
Yeah.
Tell yourself you're ready. Tell yourself that people who are way less smart than you do this. Somebody once asked, how do you buy a house? You know, it was a young person who had never gone through the process of buying a house. And if you've never been exposed to it, you think, how will I ever figure out how to buy a house? Like, there's so many steps and all this stuff you don't know. And here's my little tip. Look at the people who do buy houses. They're not smarter than you. They're not. Turns out that buying a house is something that everybody can figure out. So just jump in, figure it out. So dial your ego up when you need it and down when you don't.
And you allude to that same idea with wealthy people. Like if you want wealth, you want to get rich or whatever, start reading books about them. And that's the whole reason that when I was fighting, it was easy for me to be around world classers on a daily basis because I was training with them. They were my training partners. I fought them. I sat with them. I talked with them. I ate with them, etc. And then post fighting, it was like, oh man, I got to figure out a way to like recreate that environment. So that's why I read your books. That's why I read Mike Rowe's books. That's why I read Milton Hershey's book. That's why I read these books, because it's like, oh, I aspire to do that, and this is how they do that. And so then you just, figure it out.
How much does it blow your mind, and maybe bother you too, that there are probably, I'm just going to put a number on it, let's say 25 books in the world, that if you just made everybody read those 25 books, the world would be so different. Because, I'll take you back to my childhood. So 10 years old, wanted to be successful always. So from the youngest age, I always wanted to make something of my life. There was never any time I didn't. And I thought to myself, well, what do I do? I'm from this tiny little town, 40 people in my graduating class. Parents didn't go to college. I didn't even know people who went to college. I had an aunt that I didn't know her very well who went to college. That was it. My entire, role models and everything were just entirely missing. So I thought, well, maybe smart people who have figured out how to do stuff wrote it down. And I started noticing that there were books like The Power of Positive Thinking and, Think and Grow Rich and stuff like that. So I started consuming books on how to be successful and never really stopped that. It doesn't have to be a book. It could be articles by people who've done interviews and stuff. And I became this voracious, like an anteater of just picking up nuggets of little tips and knowledge. And of course, you have to be careful because successful people lie. They lie about why they're successful. They say it's passion. No, it wasn't. Passion is what you tell people so they don't hate you, because you can get passion too. So you don't say, well, because you don't want your billionaires to say, yeah, I got rich because I had family connections and I'm a genius. Good luck to you. If you don't have those things, well, I guess that's not going to happen for you. So you can't trust successful people. You have to read a lot of stuff and then try to find the things that they all say that you can validate somehow in your own life. But my observation is that successful people, and I've continued that tradition by writing the books that you mentioned, so that people can say, all right, Scott, what did you learn? You lived this many years, you got successful. Tell us what you learned. Maybe we can do it. So I wrote it down. I did what others before me did, which absolutely allowed me to succeed. I would say that my own success is completely, the biggest variable is that other people told me how to do it. And I had to go look for it, but it was there.
So one of the things my partner Dredd, who helps me completely with the designing and the production of my book, one of the things that we talk about, and I talk about so many books on this show, and I find myself repeating something that Scott Adams said that's similar to something Milton Hershey said, that's similar to something that Mike Rowe said. It's just, and we often say this idea that, there's only so many things out there and they're just repainted, rewritten, repackaged in a different way. And that's similar to what you're saying, like it's out there, 25 books or 25 lessons, it's all there. And this is a little bit off topic or coming from a different angle, but one of the things and part of the reason that I'm connected to you and I'm drawn to you is because you occupy a stance or a place that I aspire to occupy as well. People care about your books. People tune into your live streams. You're very smart. You're very intelligent, very well-spoken, very creative. And I aspire, as I'm building this post-fighting career, to occupy a seat like that. And what do you think of this idea, and or have you considered it? I'm a buyer of Scott Adams, right? So if you write a book, chances are I'm going to buy it, right? I read a lot of books, so I can't buy them all at once, but I'm a buyer of Scott Adams, that if he says something, I'm going to listen and I'm going to think about it. And that's one of the things that we intentionally or cognitively were aware of, that, okay, this is about the content of the book I write, but this is also about giving people a feeling of buying into, I buy into Scott Adams, period. I buy into Jocko Willink, period. Are you like, I mean, you tell me, I could be wrong, I could be off, but what do you think of that? Are you aware of that? Do you consider that when you do the things that you do?
Well, I did not consider that early on when I was doing it, but I consider it very strongly now. And I've referred to this as almost intellectual warlords, because what the internet has allowed that never existed before is that like-minded people or smart people or whatever you want to call it can find each other and form alliances, and they're very informal alliances. And without really putting any effort toward making that specific thing happen, I look at my network that is sort of spontaneously formed around me and around others. And I can see, for example, that if I had an important message to get out, let me give you an example. On January 24th, when I first heard about the Wuhan virus, I was on Periscope just going nuts about closing the airports. And I asked for a fact check on this because I don't know for sure, but I think I might have been the first public person to say that. Now, because I'm a public person who has other public people watching me, there are also clusters of supporters and followers. My message goes to those clusters. Those clusters, if they like it, they get to filter it, of course, but they can send it out. And 4 days later, the president closed the airports in what was considered shockingly early and aggressive fashion, and probably saved a lot of lives. Now, that's the kind of thing. Now, I'm not claiming that I can trace that back to my voice, but it's the sort of thing you're seeing all the time, which is influential people who have built some kind of credibility are connected in some way to other pods of influential people. And if the right idea comes from any one of those pods, or warlords, if you want to call it that, whatever name you want to put it on, those clusters can sort of immediately self-organize. And you're seeing it happening around the coronavirus situation, because people are just jumping in with their networks and influencing their network or influencing other people. And I've said this, and I'm not sure people can hear it when we're in the middle of the crisis, but there is something unambiguously beautiful about what's happening, which is there's never been a time when the entire globe, everybody, was on the same page at the same time trying to solve the same problem. We've never had that. Now, there's a little bit of blaming each other and, what did China do? And they should have, that's normal. But people to people, we're all in this, and people are trying to do the right thing for themselves and for others. It's kind of beautiful. It's hard to recognize that because people are dying, but it's a beautiful thing.
I want to add to that. So 2 things. One, the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger, he talks a lot about that, not just with, I don't know if he mentions 9/11 or not, but he talks about different periods in history that were very traumatic and lots of loss of life. And then the bond and the unity that creates. And then I don't know if you've watched or are interested in Mark Maron, but I was watching his comedy special on Netflix last night. And I actually don't know when it was new to my screen. So I doubt it. I don't know when it came out, a week ago, maybe something like that. But, he was just talking about similar stuff, the lines of thinking, thought, kind of the societal stupidity on some issues. And he was saying, and I like, what will it take? What will it take to end this stuff? And I was thinking, wait a minute, I wonder if that's like foretelling, or if that was after the coronavirus, but it was a really timely statement that alludes to what we're talking about.
Okay, I'll check that out.
And also I want to add, so since September, my family, and this alludes to what you were talking about, an unintentional goodness or good thing around it. My mom got really sick and my brother got really sick in September, same time. And it was insane. And I'm in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And then they were out in Pittsburgh at UPMC, 2 different hospitals out in Pittsburgh, and it like life and death stuff. And it hit us all at once. And so for 3 months while they were out there, we would rotate. Like I would go out there, my other brother would go out there, my sister, my dad. And it was just like this mix and match to keep them company and not alone. And I was trying to explain to my wife, and I said it out loud on air a couple of times, but I almost feel weird about it because it almost makes no sense, but it refers to what you're talking about. There was such peace and such like calm and such good when I was out there, even though it was because my brother has cancer. And even though it was because my mom was like, we didn't know what was wrong with her. But when I was out there, man, it was just so pure and so calm and so serene because I just knew my purpose, and my purpose was to be there and
Exactly.
nothing else mattered.
Exactly. Yeah. There's once you are compatible with your biological purpose, everything just feels right. Like your body feels right, your brain feels right. And so biologically, we're obviously evolved to take care of each other. Now, if everybody's doing well, we're also evolved to compete. So on the days when everything's going fine, hey, everything's going fine, I'm going to crush you. Good luck.
Exactly.
And rarely do we get a situation where everybody's on the same page, everybody knows what they need to do. There's no ambiguity about what the objective is. Keep us alive, keep us healthy. And you can feel it. You can feel the world starting to come together. Somebody on Twitter said something hilarious, which is it's time for everybody in the United States to come together by staying way apart.
It's the truth. And I'm going to switch directions a little bit. One of my favorite things about, what you do in your books is you incorporate. So I love some books that are just stories, like I'm reading a book now by a guy named Ash Dykes. I just heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast. Fortunately got him on my show, but just an adventure, a young guy adventure. I just love reading the story. Yours is about concepts or ideas, but you also integrate your personal story. And I love that. I love that combination of a book. And one of my favorite things of reading about is your evolution in career paths. So this is kind of a two-part question, and the one might allude to a skill stack, and it might not. But so you're Scott Adams. You have your skills, your skill stack, right? You have your abilities, etc. And I kind of look at myself as like, okay, former Spanish teacher, wrestler, fighter, good with the microphone, in front of a microphone. So I'm just following basically my abilities to wherever they lead me. And I see your evolution, not just with corporate, not just with hypnotism, writing books, but now with your periscopes, now with your political commentary. Like, are you consciously aware of, okay, I am me, I have this skill stack, I'm just going to go wherever the smoke leads? Or is it conscious forethought as to where you're going?
There's a conscious process, but it doesn't know where it ends up, meaning that I am always A/B testing. So I'll try this, try that. Recently, I put in a whole $9,000 studio system to try to do interviews with a split screen. Didn't work. Wasted a month of my time and $9,000, and the product just doesn't work reliably. But that doesn't mean that I failed. It just means that's one thing I tried. So I'll try something else. And it's all about tweaking and trying and testing and comparing. And I just never stop. So where I end up is a little bit opportunity, a little bit luck, but there's always a rational process that got me there, even if I can't see it in advance. That's the beauty of the process. So the fact that I do a live stream Periscope every day that has picked up quite an aggressive following, and it seems to be more influential than it is just number of people is watching, because the people who do watch tend to be unusually influential in their domains. So that wasn't planned. That was just, hey, there's this new thing called Periscope on my phone. Twitter makes it. All I have to do is turn on my phone and I can talk to my Twitter followers. Oh, I'll do that. So I did that a little bit and they liked it. And I thought, well, maybe if I turn the camera sideways, the first time I did it, you do that grandpa thing where you've got the phone in Instagram mode and everybody says, Grandpa, turn sideways. So little by little, and then I improved the sound quality and the lighting and just sort of chipped away at it until now it's a major thing. But none of that I could have seen in advance.
And you elaborate on that in the book, Loserthink, about your Periscope. And I have notes written here, evolution of Dilbert, evolution of the Periscopes. Let's go to the Periscope part. And this is what I really like to read about someone like you who has your level of success or people care about what you had to say, right? One of the one of the worst things, and I'll say worst, but it's really not that bad, is when you don't do it, but when I do it, a live stream and nobody tunes in. Like, it's just like, it totally, it's just not, it's embarrassing. It's straight embarrassing because everyone knows. Another embarrassing thing is when I'll put out, social media is real fickle. And, I don't know what the algorithms say or do or whatever, but, I'll some of the things I don't think are going to get any reaction, I'll get 50 comments. Other things where I ask for a comment, I'll literally get 0. And that's like, you're exposing yourself to the world because they see he asked for something and nobody gave it. Oh man, that must suck. You talk about early in your periscoping, and I don't remember the details, but you were trying to basically double focus, multi-focus on something, and you weren't communicating directly with the audience. You were like, I don't know, trying to figure out something down there while also trying to communicate with the Periscope audience. And you just said how it was like a blunder and didn't work. And I liken that to being on stage where I'm talking. Right now I'm talking to you. It's total communication, total flow. But if I were thinking, he's not even listening to what I'm saying, is he even listening to what I'm saying, while words were coming out of my mouth, it would be a cluster F and it just wouldn't work. So
Right.
Speak to that experience a little bit, but then also overcoming that. Because I think a lot, especially in like job interviews or like whatever, intense situations, speak to that a bit.
Well, when I started periscoping, I also had, sometimes 4 viewers, 16. It started that way. And the comments that they made were, you're too old and too ugly to do this. And then I would, sniff and blow my nose and sneeze on camera, and then the sound wouldn't work. I mean, almost everything that you could imagine I was doing wrong or poorly. And people were telling me directly. But this is where the ego as a tool comes in. I'd hear all the comments and I'd say, I could improve the lighting. Here's somebody who says my sound is terrible and they made a suggestion of what to do. I could try that. I'll order that on Amazon. I'll have that little clip-on mic tomorrow. So I learned during the Dilbert comic that every criticism is like money. And that's one of the little models I keep. When somebody criticizes you, most people, if they're normal, they think, well, that's bad. I feel bad. But I've trained myself to hear this noise. Ka-ching. If somebody criticizes you, they're telling you what to do right. Now, indirectly, and maybe that's not their intention, and maybe they're not even trying to be productive, but they are telling you what to do right, and you needed to hear it, even if it hurts. So I just treat it like money. The quick story, when the Dilbert comic first came out, it was terribly unsuccessful at first. For the first several years, actually 3 years, it just laid there like a dead turd. And people would write to me and they'd say, well, we like it okay, when Dilbert is at home, but we like it a lot when he goes to the office. And at the first, it was not an Office Place strip. It was just a generic strip. So I thought, well, my artistic integrity tells me to keep it the way it is because that's what I like. But the customer is telling me to change it. And since I had an MBA and I wasn't an artist per se, I listened to the customer. It's just basic training in MBA school. So I listened to the customer and said, all right, what they want is the workplace comic. So I changed it. And of course, all of my success came from that bit of ego judo. Mm-hmm. If I had not been able to take down the walls of my ego to give them what they asked for very clearly, unambiguously, they were asking for that. Instead of saying, no, I have a vision. I'm the artist. Let me tell you what you want. Had I gone that way, it would have been a failure. Now, since then, I've given, hundreds of wannabe cartoonist advice. I think only one of them took my advice. He's a multimillionaire. His name is Stefan Postis. He just got a movie. He's got a movie with Disney, and his comic Pearls Before Swine is one of the biggest things in the country. Almost everybody else, I would say, if you do this change, do this, well, they would look at me and say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I really want to do it my way. You'll never hear from them. That is an ego that just took them right off the field. They're not even in the game.
You know, I was not going to bring up that part because I figured he's probably said that a lot, so I'm not going to ask him about it. But I am glad you explained that, because that was one of my favorite things to read about and to learn, especially in this phase of my life, because life and business, you have this romantic view of, you know, I'm this and I'm a creator and this is my thing and I'm going to go and I'm going to go. But if you do want to make it a business, the consumer has to care about it. There is a
Yeah.
line, and actually, I'm going to state this, and then you either correct me or add on to it, or but you know this. There is a line where, like, well, Dilbert is my creation. I have to listen to them, but is there a slippery slope of letting it get out of like what it is to you? And
Yeah, yeah. The creator still has to curate the suggestions. So I don't take them all uncritically. You know, the public, if they could do what I do, they'd be doing it. So you're always having to remind yourself, okay, there is something about me that lets me make pretty good decisions, or I would not be in this position in the first place. But I don't know which ones are the good ones all the time. So you really want to listen to other people and bounce that against your own experience. But I wouldn't take either one individually. It's kind of both.
and internally, it's a, I don't know, internally, do you think of you, and this might be like an ego, but not like arrogant ego that we think of. Do you think of Scott Adams as the business, or do you think of you're Scott Adams, the person over here, and you're running a business that's called Scott Adams?
I'll answer that by saying, have you ever been really bothered when you see like a famous athlete? It's usually athletes who talk about themselves in the third person. You know, Michael Jordan used to do that. I think he had the famous, somebody asked him, you know, how they came from behind and won at the end of the game. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think Michael Jordan said, Michael Jordan wasn't going to let that happen.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought to myself, when you first hear it, you say, what's wrong with these people? Is that like a mental problem or an ego problem? And then I became famous and I figured out what it is. That that I observe myself the way other people do. In other words, I am myself, but you'll never see that part. The part that's me, that's up to me to show you, and I choose not to share that with too many people.
Yeah.
But the public me, I get to observe just like you do. I mean, I literally will play myself back on Periscope and listen to myself like I'm watching a third party. You know, usually I'm just seeing if I can improve things or, you know, how it was received. But I see myself as a third party because there's the real me that you'll never know. And then there's the artificial construct of me that I've created with the help of the public. And we both look at that thing. We're all in the audience looking at me, you know, that artificial me.
I like that explanation. I think it helps me. I know it helps me. And then the thing that you just said, when I became famous, like I'm not famous, right? But I reached a level of notoriety, and I would always think of like when people would say that when I became famous, and I always thought like, how do they think of that? And I think you just explained it. Like you think of it just like I would say Scott Adams became famous. It's not like, you know, I'm famous, but it's like, no, like this is how people see me, period.
Yeah, yeah. Once you learn that famous people are always two different creatures, and they go through life that way as a permanent feature of their own awareness, then you understand why they speak about themselves in the third party, third person.
And then lastly, or not lastly, but on that segment, you know, you were talking about the cartoonist who heeded your advice, right? Who took your advice and then had success with it. You talk about it in one of the chapters is about thinking like an entrepreneur, but it is an interesting dichotomy. And we don't necessarily have to dive into this, but it's fascinating to me that, you know, as the creator, you know, someone at the beginning, at least someone, a lot of people told you Dilbert was not good, right? And it wasn't going to work. And I feel like there was a distinct person maybe in the book you mentioned, but you said it sat for 3 years. So, you know, you might have been that young cartoonist that someone else said, change this. And you're like, no, I'm staying with this. So it's such like a game of, I don't know, chance or luck or timing or whatever.
Well, I don't think it's luck in the sense that there's something very specific you can do, which is take your ego out of the situation. So I think there's a technique there, but I'm certainly the person who says that all success requires luck. There's just no way around it. At the very least, it requires the absence of bad luck. So, neutral might get you there, but you usually need a positive piece of luck. But you also need technique. If you have luck and then you can't capitalize on it because you have no technique, that's not going to take you anywhere. So you can manage luck as well. I talk about that in another book. But managing luck is the process of going where the luck is. So I use the lightning example. If you were trying to be hit by lightning, let's say for whatever reason you wanted to be hit by lightning, don't just stay where you are. Go to the top of a mountain that's famous for lightning strikes, build a network of lightning rods, put your hand on it, bring your camping equipment, and stay there until lightning hits you. And lightning's probably going to hit you because now you've gone where the luck is. So if you're expecting luck to find you on the couch, good luck, because it's not coming to your house. But if you go out and interact with the world and make mistakes and network and create energy, luck will notice you. I mean, figuratively speaking, luck will find you if you're creating activity. So create activity, luck will find you, and then you've got to put some technique on it to capitalize.
Yeah, it's for me, speaking of that, for me, it was when I decided, hey, I want to go from my small town to fighting in the UFC. I moved to where UFC fighters were because I knew that, hey, if I want to become this thing, I've got to be them. And actually that goes into my next point. You are what you do. When I wanted to be a professional fighter, I just wasn't. I was scared of fighting. I was a former wrestler, et cetera. And then I started training and learning and fighting. And then I was like, whoa, almost like looking at me like other people look at me like, wow, that guy's a fighter over there. He knows how to fight. And it was only because I did those things. And we alluded to the Scott Adams that we all know, and then the Scott Adams that is in your house, et cetera. But as much as you want to or feel comfortable or just say pass, in the book, it talks about you are what you do, right? And change who you are by changing what you do. And so what are some of the things that you do? Again, you can speak professionally, you can speak, I don't know, idea, whatever, however you feel comfortable. What are some of the things that you do and practice on a regular basis?
Well, let me give it a framework. I've said this before, that a perfect life would be born as a baby and you're completely selfish, but then you learn to help out a little bit as you get older. And by the time you're middle-aged, maybe you're giving more than you're taking. You're taking care of your kids and your work and your spouse or whatever, your grandparents. And by the time you're my age, if you've done everything right and luck was on your side, you've taken care of your own needs and you're turning it completely around, where you're mostly giving and you don't need much on your own because you've taken care of that. So the perfect life is going from being born perfectly selfish, and then your final dying moment, your estate is distributed and you've given away all of your wisdom and love and possessions. So I always see the perfect life as dying, having given everything away, yeah, in some sense. So that's the first thing. And then to your question about you are what you do, I'm at that point in my life where if I'm not doing something that unambiguously is for someone else's benefit, I can't be happy with myself. So when I wake up, I do think about, all right, what am I going to do today that'll make some other people feel good about their day, make more money, be healthier, whatever it is. So I actually literally think about that when I plan my day. Because I have the luxury of having what I need for myself. So I don't need to be selfish as much anymore. So that's my description of how you should decide what to do. It depends on the point of life. If you're 10 years old, what you need to do is be really selfish and take care of your schooling and health. Don't be selfish with, candy and, disobeying your parents, not that kind of thing. But figure out where you are in your life and then be compatible with that part of your life. That's what you should be doing, either building up yourself or getting to the point where you can help others.
And I'll start to wind it down here. I had two more things I wanted to touch on. You mentioned your, when we were talking about Periscope, you mentioned your listeners or your followers, and you used the word aggressive, influential. There are certain people that I follow, interact with, whose books I read, whom I'll tag once in a while on social media, that always resonates. like always resonates, telling me, wow, they have a really active following. And yours sits at the top of that heap of that mountain. People are really, really, really into what you are doing, and they're really into you. Anything that mentions you, active, like interactions, impressions, whatever they're called on social media. Why do you think that is?
Uh, that's a good question. Some of it has to do with celebrity obsession. So because I got famous doing the Dilbert cartoon, I'm just naturally draw more of an audience. Some of it is that I don't fit into a box, and that drives people crazy. So people's emotions get really worked up when they don't know what box to put you in, because they feel like you need to be in a box. I'm in a box. Everybody else is in the box. You need to get over here in a damn box. So I think that's part of it. Part of it is, and it's reflected in all of my professional stuff that's worked as opposed to the stuff that hasn't worked. There's plenty of that. But the stuff that's worked demonstrates that there's something about the way I talk or communicate that people want to hear. In other words, there's just something about the word choice, the assembly of ideas, the filters I put on things that people enjoy. And I don't know what that is. Like, is that something I'm born with, or whether I learned it? Maybe it's a combination. That's hard. It's a little mysterious to me as well. But you've seen it yourself. There are people, and let me drop the modesty, okay?
Please.
if I can, I think with you and in the context of this conversation, I think I'm safe to do that. A little bit of false modesty is okay. For the world likes it. It's polite. A little bit of false modesty. But there are people who have more charisma than other people. And I don't know how to explain it. You see AOC, and you could hate her politics or love her politics, but you can't deny there's a charisma there.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Matt Gaetz, if you want to take a Republican example. Super charisma. It just flies off of the screen when you see him. And maybe I have that. I don't think I do when I watch myself, because I don't have a physicality which is interesting like these other people I've mentioned. And I feel like I'm, low energy and kind of monotone sometimes. So I don't see it in myself. But this is one of those cases where I observe other people seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So your comment rings true, even though it's somewhat invisible to me because I'm too close to it. Like when I watch myself, I go, I don't know. I don't know what you're seeing. I'm glad you like it though.
A couple of things that I thought of when you were talking about that. Stay in your lane. You talk about that as one of the worst pieces of advice that you could give someone. And what you just explained of not fitting into a box, I wanted to bring more so to the listeners. I don't know if you read it or are looking for stuff to read, but the book Range was a really good book about learning about a lot of things, and maybe a skill stack, maybe that's a mental skill stack. But I thought, listeners, if you haven't read that book, it's a really, really good book called Range.
Who's the author?
David Epstein.
Oh, okay. David Epstein. Yes. He's a good author.
Really, really good book. And then kind of the last thing, I'll start to wind it down. You talk about in the book, where to start. You talk about couch lock. Again, this is all in the book, is tremendous. But I get a lot of juice from people like you because you do things and then you learn and then you keep going and then you just kind of go to wherever it leads you. And maybe this is just a statement more so, but I appreciate that aspect of you, that you see something and you're like, oh, I don't know. Well, okay, I'll just do it. And then your ability to not take it personally. When you're talking about the Periscope comments, as a professional fighter, if you push me, I push you. If you punch me, I punch you. You insult me. It's like, so I've really had to change how I operate in the world, because if I get rejected on a phone call, I can't fight them. I just have to kind of breathe.
Right.
But that's a skill that you have that I just, it's an aspirational skill that I think is tremendous.
Well, the good news is that practice makes everything easier. There are very few things that don't yield to practice. And I have embarrassed myself in more situations than most people ever will in their life. So I've got that advantage. So the more you embarrass yourself, the stronger you're going to get, period.
Yeah. And I'll kind of end my piece here, but you mentioned a little bit about it. But at the end of the book, I always read acknowledgments in books and the post, right? But you thank the Twitter followers for nonstop attempt to make you feel sad. And that was, to me, that rang true. So just yet Monday morning. So when I was fighting, I would get all kinds of like hate, you're terrible, you suck, you're pathetic, blah, blah, blah. Haven't gotten it in a long time. I got one the other morning, Monday morning, about my fighting. My last fight was in 2014. I was like, what the, like, where did this come from? But I was like, yes, because this is another slide I can show in a presentation that helps young kids realize you're not alone in this. It is continual. But I think it's cool. And you mentioned the kind of cha-ching, you know, whenever you get the hate or the suggestions or criticisms. But again, that did, at this point in your life, when social media came along, when Twitter came along, you were already forged in your life. Did you ever take the Twitter stuff personally at this phase of your life, even when it just started?
Well, it's impossible to not take it a little bit personally. So there's no such thing as being completely detached. Mm-hmm. It's sort of an ongoing struggle. But I can't think of any time that I've been on Twitter that I took anything personally. Because by then I'd been so seasoned by being the Dilbert cartoonist for years, I'd seen every kind of insult. But as you're telling your story, which I enjoyed, that years after your last fight, somebody woke up and decided that was a good use of their time to write an angry, insulting letter to you years after you've retired from that sport. And I'm thinking to myself, that's kind of a win.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of a win, because who else cared about it, anybody?
Right.
Enough to write a letter. So if you can make an impact on somebody that they'll write you an angry letter, years after you've retired, you're doing something.
You
right.
made an impact. And it said that they never wanted to have a stroke so bad as when they watched me fight. So it was like a really, like a really powerful one. That means I did really well.
Well, they're paying attention to you, and you weren't paying attention to them. So I'd say you won.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been awesome. And I'll wrap up my end and kind of leave you to mention or direct the listeners wherever. But I've done, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of episodes, hundreds of interviews, I don't know, 100, 200, a lot of them. And yours sticks out to me, and it will forever, as me reaching out to a guy that I thought he'll never respond to me, but I'm going to try it anyway. You responded years ago, and then you responded recently, and my partner in this, Dred, he was like, he responded to you? He's going to be on the show again? I was like, yeah, we're like kind of like Twitter DM communicators. I don't know why, but he's coming back, and I absolutely love it. So from my vantage point to you, I sincerely appreciate it. I mean, it's one of the highlights and most memorable kind of experiences that I get to share in this part of my life. And it's awesome.
There's a funny backstory to your story, which is, first of all, the reason I come back is because you did a great job on the first one. So, I mean, it was easy to come back. It was an easy yes. But I saw on Twitter, and you probably remember this, somebody asked you about bringing me back as a guest, and you said something on Twitter about, I don't know, didn't want to ask me or didn't know if I'd say yes or something. And I read it, and I thought to myself, I wonder if he'll ask. Because I was already a yes, like before you asked. And I thought, I wonder if he's going to see past his ego. Because you see what that was, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly what we talked about. The fact that you didn't ask earlier suggests that you thought you might get a no.
Yeah.
And that was never the case. Now, suppose I had said no. What difference would it make?
None at all. I mean, I would still like it. I'd still buy your books. I'd still whatever. I'd say, he's busy. Can't do it.
So you got in the cage, you took a punch, and it paid off.
100%.
That's a perfect way to stop a podcast right there.
Absolutely. So where, let the listeners know, the book is Loserthink. I talk about it all the time. I talk about him all the time, but where, whether it's social media, website, where should they go to find your stuff?
Well, on Twitter at Scott Adams Says, all one word, or Dilbert.com if you want to watch the comic. Those two places will get you everywhere else.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you so much, Charlie.